Welcome to another episode of the SCP Podcast. I am Daniel Oganyemi. I have the honor of hosting for the education domain, and we have something really exciting going on. We're starting a new series called the Past-President Speaker Series. We're going to try to talk to as many past SCP presidents as possible. It's a special series that's dedicated to really preserving the legacy and the wisdom, the history of the Society of Consulting Psychology. It's through these conversations with past SCP presidents. We'll explore experiences that have shaped our field, the lessons that continue to guide our profession, and the many, many opportunities that are forthcoming. And we are kicking this off with such a special guest. I am so excited to be the one to be able to steward this series and to start with someone who honestly does not need an introduction. And I know that's a cliche thing, but he doesn't need an introduction because he's everywhere. He does everything. He knows everyone. And the best part about it is he has a fantastic reputation. When I first got started in the field, people always will start asking me. In fact, my dissertation chair asked me to walk up and find Greg Pennington. And so I am so elated to talk to Dr. P. I mean, his bio speaks for itself. His experiences speak for themselves. He's a PhD clinical psych grad from UNC Chapel Hill. He has his BA from Harvard. He's a fellow and a two-time past president of the of APA Division 13
Right.
SCP. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of what this man does, including drawing, painting, dancing, and judo. So just in case you thought you were going to mess with him on
Yeah.
the physical side, you might want to back up and rethink again.
Yeah.
Dr.
Yeah.
Greg Pennington, welcome to the SCP podcast.
It's my pleasure, Daniel, and I'm equally honored to be sitting here with you and trying to match up with your energy. So I'm excited about this opportunity. And like you said, it has a really long-lasting purpose. I mean, it's not just in the moment, and hopefully people get something out of this for some time in the future. And that's not just
Yeah.
me, that's just the whole list of people who've been in this kind of role for the division.
Yeah. So, Dr. P, I really just want to know, like, for those that are listening and will listen for years to come, who are you? How did you get into consulting psychology and then a two-time president of SCP? Like, what's
hmm
that about?
Well, so the first part of the question, excuse me, how did I get into consulting psychology? It sounds like I'm joking about this, but in thinking backwards, I would say I must have been on the path to be a psychologist from the time I was in kindergarten. Because I
Mm,
can think back about instances where I was more interested in observing people and watching people and guessing what they were thinking and why they were doing some of the stuff they were doing than I was being in the center of it. And then I
mm,
can think of instances where people would say, I was just thinking about this, and when I was thinking about this, I was wondering about this, I was going to do this. And what I remember is just saying, interesting, or why, or maybe. And then sometime afterwards they would say, "Oh, thank you." And I'm like wondering, what did I do other than listen? So
yeah.
behaviorally, I would say I've been in what we now call psychology or acting like a psychologist all my life. And then fast forward when I went to undergraduate at Harvard, I had the pleasure of taking a class called Applied Psychology by Dave McClellan. So
Mm,
I was just hooked then in terms of how do you take psychology and apply it to different settings. His whole focus was around motives, like need for
okay.
achievement, need for affiliation, need for power.
Mm,
So I grabbed a hold of the need for power because I thought, no, I don't want power, but the data would say, yeah, I do want it. So,
mm,
but that was the beginning of what I would say is the applied psychology. And I knew I wanted to do something with psychology in education or community development or
mhm.
corporations but I went to clinical because that was a more publicly known field in terms of being able to call myself a doctor. But that was it.
Sure.
So it's consulting psychology is the home. I think broadly it's applied psychology. And I
Mm,
remember George Miller, a former president of APA, challenged the APA to give psychology away. I don't think he meant literally give it away and don't make money, but he meant, if we know stuff that works based on science and practice, then what do we do with it? How are you going to
Yeah,
make it practical? How are you going to put it in the field? So that was it broadly. And I came out of graduate school, and my first job was a human resources manager for a savings and loan. So I hit the road, figuring out how do you apply this stuff.
yeah.
And then the other part was the leader, the
Yeah,
president part.
you seem to be this bridge of leadership within SCP. You've been a two-time president.
hmm
At the time of this recording, you've also stepped back into the presidential trio
hmm
to lend your support and your wisdom there.
hmm
Why? Why do you say yes? Why do you remain as engaged as you are within SCP?
Yeah, and some of this I would really connect back to Rodney Loman and others who said, you need to come join SCP, okay?
Mm,
Society of Consultant Psychologists, and Randy. Randy used to talk about it as a community, a learning community, and I was like thinking, I want to join stuff where I have some direct connection between what I say and what I do and what happens. So what I
mm,
would describe as right-sized. So I've been in the APA, I've been chapter president for the Association of Black Psychologists. Um, I've been in a number of different other organizations. Then I thought, well, let me see what they're talking about this, learning community, because people always say that and talk about that. So my
mhm.
first time coming to SCP, I thought, oh, this is kind of the right size and it's an applied arena. And then I thought, I don't want to join anything that I'm not active in and having some impact in. And
Right.
so when I got to that conference, I realized there wasn't that much colorization, in the group. And I thought,
Yeah.
one thing that's got to happen here, it's got to be a lot more chocolatey for me to be comfortable here. And I thought, let me just make a statement, do something, see how people react. And so we had a gathering, I would call it then. Actually, now we call it folks at the fountain. So that first
Mm,
conference, I went around and tapped the shoulder of people who looked like me, and I said, "What are you doing during the break?" Um, and they said, no, nothing. I said, well, can you meet me at this fountain, outside water fountain? So all the people who were browner skin um, gathered and sat around, but there's no agenda. It was just gathering. And
yeah.
it was noticeable. And
Hmm.
people started murmuring. And it hit right to the core of some other people in SCP who were beginning to be concerned that it was becoming too inclusive, too cliquish. And so, how
Mm,
do you keep SCP delivering on his mission and not limiting it to just a few people doing all the same things? So, those two,
right.
my little diversity lens, and then this growing attention to we're always the same people doing the same thing, doing leadership. And so right away, just got some visibility and some impact. So I
And
thought,
Dr. P, if I may interject a
yeah,
question
sure.
just for a second, what time frame is what year is this that
Oh, this
we're
is uh this is probably, I don't know, gotta fact check this, like the 2008 or so,
okay.
2000, early 2000s, actually, not 2008, more like early 2001 or two, something. 'Cause I've been around. So this makes about 25 years doing this. So,
That's
um,
amazing.
so I actually start off as the diversity chair. And
Okay.
then not too long after that, ran for president and thought, okay, now what do you do? And, came back another time later, but I'll tell those stories going on. But the kernel of what my answer to what your question is that I just wanted to be in a place, go back to that reference to having a need for power, more affectionately consider having a need for influence and impact and
Mm,
particularly through others. So it was that, and it was the right size SCP. PSYOP was too large, APA huge, but in terms of fitting my style and my energy, SCP happened to be the right opportunity, the right time.
yeah, I absolutely love that. One of the things that you're really known for, we'll talk about legacy here in a few,
Mhm,
but I want to turn towards leadership. And I want to read
mhm,
a quote that you quote, and it's leadership is not revealed in vision statements, but in the everyday choices leaders make when pressure, power, and people collide. And then
Yeah,
there's also what I have heard you talk about, that leadership is sometimes like herding cats and dogs.
yeah, yeah.
Can you put more language to what actually leadership is and how these concepts come to life for you?
Yeah, I do, and so much I hadn't planned this, so I appreciate the questions pulling stuff out of me. So probably the more consistent way I describe leadership is that it's really the intentional exercise of influence on others for some desired result, right? So it's not like accidental. You happen to be breezing and people say, "Oh, I saw what you were wearing. I'm going to wear the thing." It's really intentional. That's why I keep
Mm,
going back to that need for influence and impact. And so as a leader, and I've gravitated to being able to say this comfortably out loud, having grown up with four brothers and my mother saying, "Don't think you better than anybody else." So
mm,
I'm more comfortable recognizing that I've got something, you know. It might be information, it might be relationship, it might be, title, power. I've got something. And then the question becomes, what do you do with that thing? And part of what I do with that thing is that, and leaders do with that thing is that I'm gonna say something in the right moment, and it's gonna have some ripple effect. I mean, at least from people reacting. Maybe they
mm,
won't necessarily do, but I want to be conscious that I can say something, do something, arrange something, and it will have some impact on others. And I think now, even from the coaching standpoint, that to me is an element of the executive coaching with leaders in general. How comfortable and how clear are you about the power that you have? In
mm.
some settings, I might say the role that you have, the influence you have, the impact you have, but still emotionally, it really boils down to what do you do with that power that you have, and do it for personal benefits or do it for broader societal or other benefits.
Yeah.
But at the part about the everyday moments is that, and I was coaching with someone yesterday, and regardless of the question, but his answer was very noble and generic, right? So this is what I try to do, and I want to make sure I give people room to, make their own decision, give them some autonomy. Now,
Mm,
he should know that I've already been talking to his boss and the HR people who are saying that, he comes across as intimidating and over demanding. So it isn't, I just use that as an example to say that we are all vulnerable to um, being swayed by our intentions and
mm.
then blind to our impact. So
Yeah.
my intentions are this. But if you ask somebody who works for you, or if somebody volunteered who worked for you that said that, I was really, when I had this conversation with Daniel, when I had this conversation with Greg, or when I had this conversation with my coach, it made me think or made me do. So it's those two things that come together for me that leadership, and over the years and up to now, and hopefully going forward, or anybody listening will take leadership intentionally as a phrase, not leaders.
Mm,
So if I'm in a team without the title other than the peer level, I can still exercise some leadership because now I
yeah.
can say to my other peers who respect me, Daniel is making sense. He's trying to help us out. So don't be resisting the boss. So I have some impact horizontally, vertically up and down. But you have to be
Mm,
real clear about that if you really want to be as effective as you can be or imagine you could be. But it still
yeah.
boils down to give me an example, right? So
Mm,
what you do, you said you want to give people space. And so the guy was coaching yesterday, he said that in a generic way. And I said, give me an example. Because we want to see that moment, you know, and then you connect the dots, others connect the dots. So it's not just an isolated moment, but it's an interesting, valuable, information loaded moment. But the pattern certainly becomes equally important or more important than that singular moment.
yeah, I absolutely love that. And one of the things that you're actively making me rethink, and so I'm going to ask it out loud, is this concept of power. And you
Hmm.
reframed it a little bit earlier by talking about influence.
Hmm.
And at the same time, power still has a relatively negative connotation. Can
Yeah.
you provide more clarity on how you're using the term and the
Mhm.
concept of power and what it actually means for helping other people with the power that you have?
Yeah, so lots of pieces of it, and I try to go to the cusp of it. It is, at least from my framework, it starts with Dave McClellan, who for different reasons said, let me boil this down to three motives: need for affiliation, need for achievement, need for power. And so all the research is focusing there, and my dissertation construct was need for power.
Hmm.
So those three things, right? And then to peel it apart, I think it became real clear that depending upon the society, culture, both family culture and broader culture, the connotations of the word power could be any number of things from positive to negative, but leaning toward negative. So over the years, meaning since Harvard days, so 55 years or so, when I've had a chance to say, pick a motive that drives you, need for affiliation, need for achievement, need for power. And nobody publicly says need for power because of those connotations. My self-reflection data and self-assessment or assessment from the outside was, Ronnie, you have this high need for power. I think, no, that's not me. That's negative. So power comes in personal format and social format. And that's where
Hmm.
the influence or impact terminology comes into play.
I
So if
see.
I think of it as, what can you do? What can you do intentionally that influences others in terms of what they feel, think, and do? So that's this little sliver of it, Daniel, that I can intentionally say, we're going to paint this house differently. I can
Yeah,
intentionally say you did a great job. I can intentionally say what you did is terrible. I can intentionally say, let me put you in a beginning role. I can intentionally do things that have some impact on you or intended
mm,
impact on you, right? So
sure.
that's the simplest part of what I would say. Leadership is this exercise of influence or impact. Now,
Mm,
the part that in terms of how it actually shows up. Um, I think there's is and so many quotes out there that come in the category of it's not just what you say and do, is how people react to it. That
mm,
becomes really a valuable part of the answer. And because some of that power to be direct can be abusive. I've got
yes,
so much power. Let me see what happens if I push this button. Let me see what happens if I push this button. In a scary sense, that can mean literally push the button that causes disaster worldwide, but metaphorically, it could be I know that person that works for me needs a whole lot of detail. Okay? I'm not going to give them a whole lot of detail because I know it's going to
mm,
aggravate them, and then I'll see what happens when they get aggravated. I
yeah,
know there's one word if I say it, it's going to tick somebody off. But the flip side of that is true too. I know there's one word or one phrase I can do, like, I really appreciate what you do. That's going to make that person warm and receptive.
yeah,
It's a long continuum, right? So sometimes you say need for power, exercise of power. It can border on manipulation,
sure.
right? But that's still a connotation that one has. But I do think when you get into different roles, along with those roles become some hierarchical accountabilities and some access to resources, not just financial, but time and the ability to decide where somebody goes. That's the part that I think, should make leaders and people in leadership settings pause and say, let me be planful about this. Let me be strategic about it. I want to set something in motion that others will pick up, and carry to the next level.
Yeah, that resonates and makes so much sense to me that it really is this personal integrity and accountability when
Hmm.
you recognize that you have such authority and the ability to influence and impact another person. At the time of this recording, I've been to one SCP conference, which was in Las Vegas, and your impact, even on me, in the short time that we were able to interact there, all the way up to now has been really profound. At the conference, you were adamant about adding or connecting on LinkedIn. You mentioned it a couple of different times. You were
Yeah,
very
yeah.
receptive whenever I came up to you and told you my dissertation chair, my professor told me to seek you out
Hmm.
and to chat with you. You were very receptive, even when during the follow-up email and conversation that we had. And that's not necessarily always the case for humans. Sometimes
Yeah, yeah,
humans
yeah.
that have gotten the ability to do things, to have an impact, to be in positions. Um, I, in my life, have found that not everyone is as open to new people.
Hmm.
I consider that being a part of legacy. Leaving a legacy is beyond what you do. It's also how you make people feel when they're around you.
Hmm.
Why is legacy so important to you? And what exactly is the legacy that you might hope to leave?
Yes, I mean it's a real important question. I think the I mean I've discovered this quote that I use sometimes in answering a question like this, and it's one of these quotes that you do the Google search on, it's like, oh, did this person say it? Did this person say it? Did this person say
Yeah,
it? But and that in and of itself is pretty profound statement that is the quote becomes universal. So is it attributed to this person or that one? In
sure.
essence, it goes something like this. We do not simply inherit the past from our ancestors. We also borrow the future from our children.
Wow.
So that notion of what I do now has an impact on people who come in after me is a real important driver. And so, and then even, I mean, the other candid comment would be that as self-effacing and as I um, think I am sometimes, and then as introverted as I used to be, and as humble as I aspire to be, the truth is, I want people to remember me. I want to have done something, right?
Mhm.
But so the doing something when you're live, has a nice warm shower, associated with doing something that people will continue to do or add on doing or remember doing or gotten able to do because of you just contributes to our longevity as a species, right? So
Mhm.
it starts off with this contribution. What difference am I making? Maybe it starts off with do you even care about making a difference? Lingering difference. And so the legacy for me, and it's one of those things where I recognize that uh, you can only aspirationally say what you want your legacy to be, right?
Mhm.
I want people to remember this. And then they
Mhm.
say, oh, yeah, yeah, Daniel and Dr. P said he wanted to be remembered this way. And as we put him into the ground, we'll say, he always said, remember me. And then after the ground gets cold, then they'll say, oh, who was Dr. P? Right? So the legacy in some ways that I would describe, I really have very little impact on. It's going to be what people volunteer and what people say afterwards. So what you said is more reassuring, reaffirming to me than what I would say.
Mhm.
And for me, it's real simple. What I really want people to do as a category of memory would be, um, I remember he just did a simple thing like say hello. And in that moment, if they said, why don't I get up there and go to say hello to that person who said it was their first time, right? First time here.
Yeah.
But even from there, it goes from uh, Dr. P did this. I'm going to do it. You probably did it in a different way than I did it. And then your follow-up's going to be different as well. But in
Mhm.
some ways, I think about the simplicity of behavior. Um, when I meet people, when I get LinkedIn with people, now I follow up and say, do you want to get furconned? I sort of made that up. Further connected. So LinkedIn, whatever that number is, but I want to have a recollection of you and you should have a recollection of me. You only get that. Well, it's a higher probability you get that if we had some one-on-one time. And
Right.
so I'm just all over the efficiency of electronic age where people can look at the calendar and they see I'm not doing anything for this 30 minutes on this date. So that's an easy fill for me versus making it difficult. So
Yeah.
those things, and that's part, I know this is still a history of SCP. I would like to think that I contributed to the legacy of making people feel welcomed at SCP. And so some of that becomes more and more formal, like first timers stand up. Some of it still has to be informal, like um, an old fogey with stogie coming into the main area and seeing this table with two people sitting there, and they're
Mm.
unfamiliar faces. And another table, you see 10 faces that you know. And in that moment, you decide to go sit with the two newbies, right? And then they
Mm.
remember, oh, you sat down with me. And then a little bit later, they might say, do you know who that is? But that's not as consequential as just sitting down with them to start with. So that
Right.
part of it. And then other thing that I like to think is that this was kind of intentional. Hopefully it's established. Um, it's connected to some research we did with SCP about what draws people to SCP. So it's science based in that respect. My translation of that data point was that when I talk to people, more often than not, I would say, "Are you as engaged as you want to be?"
Oh yeah, I've heard you ask that before.
Yeah, because I want to frame it as you can be engaged. I want to frame it as personally, you may not be one of those as extroverted or as active, but also want to imply, not so much indirectly, but directly, you got choices. Don't be sitting here and saying nobody spoke to me if that's what you want. So how engaged are you as engaged as you want to be? And they say yes, and I say good. Let me know if you need to find out any more information.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that is such a big deal. And to your point that you mentioned about going and being involved, I have the luxury of being an extrovert. And so
Mhm.
at one point I sat with someone that was sitting by themselves at a table, and as the world turns, we found out that this person had a connection to my oldest brother. And
Yeah.
they knew each other quite well. And it was just what is one of those times where it's like, how in the world, like, how does this happen? Right?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah, it's so amazing. So,
yeah.
sticking with SCP, I've heard SCP be referred to as the
Hmm.
Division.
Yeah.
What does that title mean? And why does SCP get to wave that banner?
Yeah, and so it's sort of a historical point. When I joined the organization, I used to see it in the headers and the newsletters and the logos, the Catalyst division. So it was in place when I got here, and I
Mm.
asked the same question: where does that come from? So as you talk to people who predate me, they'll probably give you more of the story about its origin. But in practice, it meant that Division 13 Consulting Psychology wanted to have some influence and impact on other divisions.
Mm.
So, if you wanted some information or some change or had some struggles, there's some people in Division 13 that have some expertise in that area. So, but also from the intentional side, as a division, are we seeing things going on within APA and other divisions where we might, if they were clients, we might offer this kind of resource?
Sure.
What has some outgrowth of that includes some things like this is not well, it's not going to be invisible when I say it, but it is true that most APA presidents have had an executive coach from Division 13.
Oh, wow.
That's
I did
more
not know that.
informal, not not mandated, not in the bylaws, just more in the practice. If you're going
Mm.
to lead a complex organization, you might benefit from someone being your coach. So we
Yeah.
got a long history of that. Never publicly said, I am the coach for this president, but it happens from president, APA president to another one if you want this. Similarly, we've got a long history of division members being consultants to APA board or APA task forces. Um, so that's more the support part of that. The division has been fairly intentional over the years about what APA organizations should we be active in. An example would be a group called CODAPAR, Committee on Divisions and APA Relations. Its
Mm,
mission is to be a resource, a liaison from the divisions that are having some struggles or difficulties with APA governance or vice versa. So that
yeah.
notion, that's a committee we should be in because we know how to get teams working together and organized together. We don't have a guaranteed seat there, but we have um, some effort and some purposeful effort about if there's an opening in Codapar, who might we recommend? So the other task forces, like there was a task force on uh, early emerging exploratory committee on applied psychology. So different uh, task forces and committees that were relevant. But that's where it comes from. The catalyst is that we can catalyze, we can organize, we can impact, we can influence other divisions. We can apply what we do
Mm.
professionally uh, to this association of which we are members.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, and I want to go back to your presidency of SCP for just a quick moment because you've talked about a lot that you've gotten to be a part of. What
Mhm.
would you say is one of the most defining moments of, well, I would say your presidency or your presidencies? What would you say is one of the most defining moments of that?
Yeah, I think I had a quick answer to it, but and the answer is probably more organizational, or maybe one of them is more personal. But personally slash organizationally, I think it was, as I said before, I was a uh, chair of the diversity committee, and after that was after being a member for a couple of years, and I just thought we still don't have a statement. We still don't have a
Mm,
purposeful statement. So just orchestrating that and crafting that, not that it was perfect then or now, but just that movement from we do these things as an association. We got enough people who are inclined to be supportive of diversity, but it's more like let it happen from one person to the next. So I was pretty clear in my own mind that I wanted to canonize it as a diversity statement and make it more visible. So that's one of them. I do think the more organizational defining moment, and it kind of goes back to this catalyst statement. I
hmm
can't remember exact year, but most people who've been around for a while will remember the Hoffman report and that period of time when APA was accused of, APA and psychology, where psychologists were charged with aiding and abetting interrogation. So huge moment, both for the Association for Psychology for the U.S. for so forth. So I say that's a defining moment is because I was president at the time, and we had a constituent that would say, "We need to weigh in. We need to take a position on the Hoffman report and APA's, support of interrogation. We need to have a stance. We need to sign off on this." And I kept thinking, well, how do you define we? An organization that was less than 1,000 people. How do we get to a we statement? That was one hesitation I had. And the other one
hmm
was, do we know enough about the background and the data and the positions do we know enough to come to a position? So as I was personally struggling with, I don't know where I stand. I'm not educated enough about that. I sort of flashed back to what do we do best? And what we do best is help organizations and people go through a reasonable process. So we landed more on this is how you need to come, this is how we need to discuss this issue. This is how we need to pull all those opinions together. This is how we
hmm
need to do it in a way that maintains some stability or some sustainability within APA. So that to me was a defining moment for me personally and somewhat for the association because and that
Yeah.
Hoffman was just a hot item then. There's been similar issues along the way. And so
hmm
as a directional statement, I wouldn't say as a cast in stone, but a directional statement, um, how do we make sure we're orchestrating a process that we know is effective for organizations long before we come to a final position. So
Mm,
process over position is what I would
yeah.
say is real critical. And it's nice now to probably have some people saying, no, no, that's because you were conflict avoiding, Greg, you know. And
Um,
so you can get some resistance to that, but that notion of process over position.
yeah, we're kind of rounding out the corner here. Sometimes I love and I have a love-hate relationship with being the host of a podcast and in particular starting this series because I have 100 more questions I would love to lob
Yeah,
out there.
yeah, yeah.
If time were no factor, where do you see SCP and the field of consulting psychology overall going? What direction are we headed in?
Yeah, I think SCP is still on this path of how do you manage this multi-generational, membership. So how do you transition from me and my crew that are in the 70s to you and your crew that are in the 30s and keep it still alive and growing. So that's one big transition of it. I do think that there's another transition that I think we're doing pretty well on is maintaining this identity as consulting psychologists, not just coaching psychologists.
Mm,
So that's a huge piece of it. Um, and then I think psychology overall, it clearly has to deal with this AI generation. But even before I say AI, I think we were already on a path of what I would say three V's. The volume of information, the velocity of getting information, and the veracity of it, right? So
mm,
how do we manage all three of those? It just happens to be in the form of AI now. But we've always been going closer and closer to what do we do as things start moving faster and more with more questionable sources of it. So I think we
mm,
still refine it. We're on that path. And probably the other piece I would say is the productive collaboration with other organizations. We could divide APA and science into two groups, science and practice. We have a
mm.
relationship with Division 14. We have relationships with other divisions, and we got to keep figuring out how to get the best out of that rather than be protective about differentiations.
Yeah. Hmm. I love it. Is there anything about SCP or your presidency or anything like that that we haven't covered?
No, the diversity part is just so important to me, and diversity in a lot of different dimensions, the visual diversity, the diversity. We've done a good job of managing civility as a part of diversity. Some people play differently, some people joke differently, so managing that, recognizing that people have different norms in different settings, social and organizational wise. The neurodiversity piece of it. The other diversity is experience. Why do you have to be old and gray to become a fellow? Why do you have to be 20 years before you can become an officer? So that's a diversity piece as well. How much tenure do I need to be able to deliver things?
Mm,
So that to me is real valuable. SCP still is right-sized for me, and still it's a differentiator for many people will be its right sizing. You can come
yeah.
to this organization. And if you want to be real engaged, you can be real engaged. And still, we have a huge brand and presence within APA and beyond. So it's not minuscule impact.
Mm,
It is a great influential launching pad for a lot of things.
yeah. Mm. Dr. Pennington, thank you so much for your time and your contributions to not only this podcast, but just to SCP and the field of psychology overall. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate you very much, Daniel.
Absolutely.